This episode is sponsored by Fallout 76. I'm a big fan of the Fallout universe, the show, the games, and of course its depiction of food. One of the things I really appreciate about Fallout 76 is how collaborative it is. Veterans and new players can play alongside each other, creating an incredibly friendly and welcoming community. There's new content being added to the game constantly, and this year they released the Skyline Valley update with the first ever map expansion. Celebrate Fallout Day on October 23rd with a variety of giveaways and a Bethesda live stream featuring Fallout 76's next update. And you can go play Fallout 76 right now on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation.
Feed those dessert cravings with Fancy Lad's snack cakes. A big delight in every bite.
Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Binging with Babish, where this week we're taking a look at the Fancy Lad cakes from the Fallout universe, which I imagine were inspired by this national brand of snack cakes, which are themselves inspired by Petit Fours, an extremely small, extremely fancy cake. So let's pop one open and see what we're working with. It appears to be a very sort of light cake with a whipped frosting and a white chocolate fondant coating that can only be described as plain. The very plainest of Janest of plain cakes that ever planed a plain time. Luckily, we have a pretty definitive starting point, the official recipe from the official Fallout cookbook, which calls for 2 sticks of softened unsalted butter, creamed together with 1.5 cups of granulated sugar. Beat on medium speed until light and fluffy, scrape down the sides of the bowl, and add 4 large room temperature eggs, one at a time, beating until completely incorporated, scraping down the side of the bowl before adding the next. Then we're going to beat in a whopping 2 tablespoons of vanilla extract. Once that's fully incorporated, we're going to start doing the wet-dry technique. First combining 3.5 cups of cake flour, 2 teaspoons baking powder, and 1 teaspoon kosher salt, with a 1/4 teaspoon of ground allspice for some reason. Tiny whisk until homogeneous, and then we're going to start adding it in thirds. Add 1/3 of the dry ingredients and mix until well combined, before streaming in half of the wet, in this case 1 cup of whole milk. Once that's added, we're going to thoroughly scrape down the sides of the bowl, add another 1/3 of the dry, followed by the remaining wet, scrape down the sides of the bowl, add the remaining dry, along with a 1/2 cup of Greek yogurt. Then go ahead and mix it the rest of the way until all the wets and dries are evenly combined, and give it a few cursory folds at the end just to make sure that there are no hiding pockets. Next up, we're generously lubricating a 9 by 14 inch casserole, lining it with parchment paper, and pouring in our cake batter, making sure the surface is nice and smooth and even before placing it in a preheated 350-degree Fahrenheit oven for 30 to 40 minutes until golden brown, and the cake's beginning to pull away from the sides of the pan. While that's cooling, we're going to make the filling, combining 1/4 cup of cream cheese with 3/4 of a cup of marshmallow fluff and 1 stick of room temperature unsalted butter. Whip those together until fluffy, scrape down the sides of the bowl, and then for sweet, we're going to add 2 cups of powdered sugar, basically making a marshmallow fluff cream cheese frosting, which sounds pretty awesome. Mix that together for about 30 seconds before adding 1 tablespoon of vanilla extract. This cake is going to taste extraordinarily vanilla-y. Beat that until it's light and fluffy and we're ready to assemble. First thing, I'm going to try to level out the top of my cake. It domed up pretty significantly, which could lead to silly looking sandwiches. Then I'm going to trim off the edges and divide into 1.5 inch squares. The cookbook suggests sandwiching these on top of each other, but that sounds crazy to me. So I'm just going to slice them in half for a cake that will fit inside the human mouth. Once bisected, I'm going to pipe the filling onto the bottom half in 4 thick lines and sandwiching with its top cake counterpart. Now, to get nice clean sides on our snack cakes, we're going to have to do the sort of snack cake equivalent of a crumb coat, squeezing a little extra filling onto the sides and smoothing it over, making for 6 perfect facets for which to dip. Speaking of which, we need to make our outer coating. First, setting up a bowl double boiler situation, and in it combining 24 ounces of white chocolate candy melts with 4 tablespoons of vegetable shortening. Melt that over simmering water until fully melted, and we're off to the races. The cookbook recommends dipping the sides of the cake first and letting those harden completely before dipping the tops and bottom. So I'm going to play a game of musical rim baking sheets, transferring back and forth as I dip the various facets. Now, I ended up dipping the bottoms, which for the record is wholly unnecessary. I've never once ever checked the bottom of a snack cake to make sure that it was dipped, but that's what I'm doing. So after trimming off any rough edges, I'm dipping the other side and fully ensconcing the cake in white chocolate candy melts. Of course, this inverted indulgence cost me dearly, and I didn't have enough white chocolate left for decorations, so guess what? We're gonna make ourselves some square zebra cakes, opting instead for a dark chocolate drizzle. Once that's hardened, it's time for comparison. About 100% larger and maybe 50% zebra cakier, but how do they perform? As you can see, both cakes cut pretty cleanly, not that that matters at all. They both have proportionate innards, but how do they taste? And while the allspice was an odd choice, the Fallout cakes are pretty awesome thanks to that whipped cream cheese fluff filling, which I highly recommend you frost a cake with immediately. But I want to take this snack back to what I imagine its roots are, the Petit Four. So we're going to start by making a traditional Genoise sponge cake, combining 4 large room temperature eggs with 150 150 grams of granulated sugar and beating with a wire whisk for anywhere from 4 to 6 minutes until it's doubled in volume and you can draw a figure of 8 that keeps its shape for about a second. Then with the mixer running on medium-low, we're going to slowly stream in 40 grams of unsalted melted butter. Then in a separate bowl, we're combining 135 grams of all-purpose flour with a 1/4 teaspoon each ground cinnamon, cardamom, and freshly grated nutmeg. We're also going to whisk in a 1/2 teaspoon of kosher salt. Then we're going to engage in the very difficult process of slowly sifting in a little bit of this dry mixture at a time while constantly and very gently folding it into the egg and sugar mixture. This cake's only leavener is the air beaten into the eggs, so we have to take extra special care not to deflate it. Once you're reasonably sure no dry pockets remain, we're going to generously lube a 1/4 size rim baking sheet, line it with parchment paper, lube that, and once again very carefully pour in the cake batter, trying to manipulate it as little as possible to get it smooth and even. Now this guy's headed into a preheated 400-degree Fahrenheit oven for anywhere from 12 to 15 minutes until it's slightly brown and no longer making bubbling noises. While that cools, we're going to make a whipped white chocolate ganache filling. First, finely chopping or food processing 400 grams of white chocolate and pouring 250 grams of barely simmering heavy cream over top, gently mixing just to distribute, cover and let rest for 5 minutes, and whisk until smooth and glossy. Pour this into a rim baking sheet or a brownie pan for all I care, cover with plastic wrap and refrigerate for at least 2 hours until it's the consistency of yogurt? Paint? Scrape into the bowl of a stand mixer and whip on medium-high speed for 45 seconds to 1 minute until it has the consistency of a very stable whipped cream. Dump that into a piping bag fitted with a round tip and get ready to get fussy. Because we're about to make a lot of tiny cakes and it's going to be a fussy process. First, I'm going to use a tiny square cookie cutter to cut out these square bits, and I wanted to do justice by the zebra cakes I made earlier, so I've got a sextagonal cutter to cut some sextagonal bits. Once all these are stamped out, we need to delicately slice them in half using a very sharp knife. We don't want any crummy, rough edges. Now, unfortunately, I tasted this cake and it was pretty bland, so I'm going to make a spiced simple syrup cake soak, combining 1 cup each granulated sugar and water, adding 2 star anise pods, which should play nice with the warming spices in the cake, bringing to a simmer and cooking for about 5 minutes or until slightly thickened. Pull out the star anise pods, and once slightly cooled, add 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Allow to cool completely before the next fussy step in our fussy process, delicately painting each of our cake halves with the sugar syrup, which offered a massive improvement in flavor and texture. Then we're going to start piping dollops of our whipped ganache filling, and we want there to be enough that it squishes out the sides when squished. So try one out, see how it squishes, and adjust as necessary. Now I'm going to send these guys into the freezer for about 20 minutes. I want to clean up the edges, and the filling is a little bit too soft, but after a short stint in the deep freeze, it's a little firmer and forms a cleaner side. Last but not least, a pourable fondant coating. We're combining 450 grams of powdered sugar, 75 grams of light corn syrup, 60 grams of hot water, and 150 grams worth of melted white chocolate. Beat this together with a whisk until it forms a thick fondant, the consistency of yogurt, paint, whatever. You want it really thick, but still thin enough to pour, because that's exactly what we're going to do. Place the cakes one at a time on a wire rack set in a rim baking sheet, and pour the sticky, sweet, thick fondant over top. It's a very wasteful process at first. There's a bit of a learning curve, and eventually you get the hang of it, draping it around the outsides first and then hitting the top. Once everybody's nicely coated, we have to allow the fondant to set. This can take anywhere from 1 to 2 hours. You can speed it up by putting it in the fridge, but that can dull the coating. I'm trying to do justice by the original by doing a swirly white chocolate pattern on the square cakes, and of course, when it comes to sextagons, I only got one speed, zebra. Once both the fondant and chocolate garnish are set, we're going to carefully scrape them off using an offset spatula, and there you have it, old school, turn of the century, French patisserie, fancy lad, and what I'll call fancy zebra cakes. They look a treat, but how do they taste? And the answer is surprisingly awesome. The nutmeg, cinnamon, and cardamom work much better with the white chocolate than the allspice. The sugar syrup makes the cakes moist and tender, and the whipped ganache filling is as delicious as it sounds. As King's gang members so often say, I'd give anything for a fancy lad. Wait, you know what I mean. Thanks again to Fallout 76 for sponsoring this episode. We're celebrating Fallout Day this year with some very special Babish videos, including this one. Stay tuned next week for a very special episode where Alvin and I join forces to make more food from the Fallout universe. If you haven't played Fallout 76 yet, now's the time. It's a great game, and there's no better time to journey into the wasteland on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation. And to celebrate Fallout Day, you can check out a Bethesda livestream on October 23rd for a look at Fallout 76's next update.